Marvel vs. Capcom is easily one of the greatest franchise crossover series in the entire history of video games. These unbelievable games would let players face off as characters from different universes that no one ever thought would collide. Some of these titles are now considered some of the best fighting games of all time for their deep character rosters, unusual combinations of fighters, tag team mechanics and chaotic action. The Marvel vs. Capcom games certainly have a lot to offer. There was a period in time that the Marvel vs. Capcom brand seemed unstoppable. So, what went wrong that would cause all of this to come crashing down and ultimately result in the end of this series? It is no secret that partway through the life cycle of the series that Disney would buy the Marvel brand. But is it Disney who destroyed this crossover franchise? Or is it more just down to Capcom developing a poor game? Let's explore all of this further and try to answer these questions. I am the Top Hat Gaming Man, aka Big Daddy Top Hat, and this is the mad story of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Yeah! In 1994, gamers were wowed by the appearance of Akuma in X-Men Children of the Atom. The public was shocked and pleasantly surprised to see a character from Street Fighter within an X-Men game. It was just so cool to see such a spectacle happen. Capcom took note of the positive reaction this received, so by 1996 they would release an entire X-Men vs Street Fighter crossover fighting game. This was the title that introduced many mechanics and conventions that would go on to make the series so popular. Air combat, tag team action, huge ridiculous moves, matches gamers never thought possible. It was all here, and it was just so awesome to see such an insane concept come to life. The success of this game would spawn many sequels, with the franchise arguably peaking at its fourth entry, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, the most ambitious crossover game ever made by that point, with a roster of 56 characters and the tag team system being tweaked to allow 3-on-3 matches. The game was a work of art. Past this point, fighting games would fall out of favour a bit, and development houses such as Capcom would majorly slow down their production and development of such titles. But 9 years after the release of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, in a period after Street Fighter 4 would help rejuvenate the fighting game market, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 would arrive in 2011. The game is notable for being the first title to be released in the series after Marvel had been acquired by Disney, and the game was fairly well received by journalists and the gaming public at the time. Although many argue today that the roster is not as memorable as in previous installments, and the graphics do not feature the same timeless appeal as the 2D sprites featured in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Capcom would refine the game further and release an updated version with an expanded roster later that same year. However, neither of these games would remain on store shelves for too long, as Disney would prevent new sales of these games, including digitally, by 2013. Resulting in many people assuming that Marvel vs. Capcom was gone forever. Disney would further back this up by claiming they were not renewing the Marvel vs. Capcom license anymore, as they wanted the Marvel characters to be exclusive to their own games, published by Disney Interactive Studios. This would result in the huge push of Disney Infinity, an action-adventure sandbox toys-to-life game that was basically a complete shameless rip-off of Skylanders. These games, which were sold to ship physical toys, featured open world creation and story-driven gameplay, and additional features could be brought into the game by purchasing these overpriced figurines. As we now know, Disney are not the only ones who can smell money in this field, as Nintendo would choose to do exactly the same thing with their Amiibo range. But with all of these big corporate brands putting out the same sorts of products, all within a fairly short time frame, this craze would not last long at all. So by 2016, the Disney Infinity series was just as cancelled as Marvel vs. Capcom. In fact, it would not be too long at all before Disney would realise that they could not really cut it as a game publisher, so would go back to the old method of outsourcing their licenses to developers and publishers with experience in the field, who actually knew what they were doing. So by the end of that same year, something amazing would happen. That would be music to the ears of Marvel vs. Capcom fans. At a Sony PlayStation Experience press conference, it would be announced that not only was Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 going to once again become available in digital stores, but Disney had also given Capcom the licensing rights to create an all-new game known as Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, which was set for release in 2017. Marvel vs. Capcom was officially back. The new project was to be directed by Norio Hirose, a man who worked as a programmer of the series since X-Men vs Street Fighter back in 1996. Development of this title would be split between several different parties, with Capcom of Japan, Capcom USA and Marvel Games themselves all playing an active role. The concept which they intended to deliver on was to create a game which was both complex and hardcore like traditional fighting games of old, but to also be a game that was more elegant and simplified than many created in the past. You may notice straight away that these factors are arguably paradoxical to one another, but I guess what they really meant was they simply just wanted to create a game that could appeal to as wide a market as possible. So overall, the aim was to create a Marvel vs. Capcom game that kept core elements intact, such as air combos for example, but at the same time they wanted to deliver something fresh, which is even easier to pick up and play than before. I have noted in the past how games such as Street Fighter 4 and Marvel vs. Capcom 3 were already much more simplistic than games that came before them, with the entries in the Street Fighter 3 series being prime examples of more complex fighters. These sort of games did not sell well on release due to not appealing strong enough to the casual market, a problem that later titles would rectify, offering the more simplified approach. These games sold very well, so it is no surprise really that Capcom intended to double down even further on simplicity. Further to this, there was an even larger casual market for Marvel characters than there was before, as the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe had put the brand in an entire different stratosphere to its place in the world from where it was back in 1996, with the release of X-Men vs Street Fighter. Superheroes were mainstream and legitimately cool in this period. Now, there is a lot to get through with regards to what Capcom and Co did to attempt to make an even more simplistic game than the likes of MVC3. So let's go through the many elements that make up this final installment in the series. A producer working on the project known as Mark Evans states that Capcom analysed that many people who had played the last entry in the series viewed the game as way too overwhelming, with just far too much going on. For this reason, to make the game more accessible to everyone, the series' famed 3-on-3 battle system would be completely phased out and replaced with more simplistic 2-on-2 battles. As you can imagine, the axing of the 6-man tag action was hugely disappointing to many fans of the series. Previously, the games had always been championed for including more and more elements, and the 3-on-3 tag-in tag-out bouts was one of the key features as to why Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was so loved in the first place. Further to this, the previous game's chaotic nature was a staple of the series that set it apart from other games in the same genre. So this move not only seemed to be diluting the franchise to bring it more in line with other fighters, but customers would also feel cheated, having elements removed from a game rather than being added. It kind of reminds me of the release of Pokemon Sword and Shield last year. Further from this, the reduction of fighters in each match was not the only feature that would be removed from combat. As to quote Capcom, things would be streamlined further. A previous feature of the series was to call in other characters to perform assist moves. This was completely taken out of the game and instead replaced with a new feature involving the Infinity Stones. To put it simply, these 6 Infinity Stones can be loosely compared to the grooves in the Capcom vs SNK games, offering players slightly different fighting game mechanics. Although, rather than being placed in the game to present players with further customization, it seems as though they were mainly featured in order to further level the playing field in matches. The Infinity Stone's main purpose functions as a comeback enabler, compensating for losing characters' deficiencies by enhancing their strong points. As we know, there are a lot of marketing reasons why the name Infinite was used for the title, but obviously the Infinity Stones further tie into this theme, with one developer stating the goal was for the stones to present players with infinite gameplay possibilities. Like previous entries, the Hyper Combo gauge is featured within the game, that gradually fills up as characters deal and receive damage. Filling this up allows players to perform traditional hyper combos, but now a move called a counter switch is also executable. A counter switch lets characters tag out instantly even whilst an opponent is attacking them, allowing combos to be broken more simply than previously by allowing for easy counter-attack opportunities. What may come as a surprise to some is that Capcom chose to return to the old 4 attack button layout, which had not been seen since much earlier entries in the series, which must be one of the features included what Capcom were referring to when they said that they wanted the game, in some aspects, to feel like games of old. This does not particularly damage the game's accessibility though, which seems to be the main angle Capcom really wanted to push, due to the fact that combos in this game are performable simply by tapping the light punch button, both on the ground and in the air, meaning in theory, even a 3-year-old could perform combos in this game. Even hyper combos were made executable by just pressing the 2 heavy attack buttons at once. So that's the basic mechanical changes to the game, but as you know there are more factors that made Marvel vs Capcom so popular in the past than simply just the combat system. So despite the fighting mechanics themselves being gimped, does this game at least bring a charming innovative roster to the table? Let's discuss. So in the past, it seems each entry seemed to bring some kind of cool gimmick to the roster, with each passing entry. The first game lets us play as both X-Men and Street Fighter characters, the second game gave us other Marvel fighters to play as, the next one gave us new characters on the Capcom side of things, the fourth entry gave us a gigantic roster, and the fifth game ended up giving us a large roster too, this time made up of plenty of completely new fighters. They all brought us something different. So did Marvel vs Capcom Infinite provide us with an infinite amount of fighters to choose from? Well, obviously, absolutely not. Marvel vs Capcom 2 gave us 56 fighters, Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom gave us 48, whereas Marvel vs Capcom Infinite shortchanged gamers by giving us a launch lineup roster selection of only 30 different characters, which was a huge step backwards, but I guess at least it falls in line with Capcom's aim at the time to simplify things. Reducing consumer choices seems to have been one of their methods in achieving such a feat. To make matters even worse, out of the 30 characters who were chosen for the game, only 5 of those were new to the franchise, with the rest returning from previous games. On the Capcom side of things, we received X as a playable fighter, the lead character from Mega Man X, and Jeddah, the final boss from Darkstalkers 3. In terms of Marvel characters, the newbies would include Gamora from Guardians of the Galaxy, along with Ultron from the Avengers series, and Captain Marvel. Apart from wanting to simplify things, I personally feel that Capcom intentionally limited the lineup in order to encourage players to fork out even more money for the game's DLC characters. 6 characters who should have been in the game in my opinion from day one anyway, as 36 fighters was still a small number by the modern era's standards. So if you did not feel that paying for a game once was enough, you could download Black Panther, Black Widow, The Winter Soldier, Sigma, Monster Hunter and even Bloody Venom, a character who was free in previous games, making this concept even more frustrating. Apart from making gamers pay an additional fee to add content to this game that should have been there in the first place, an element that made all of this even more annoying was that many of the beloved fighters were left out of this game. Most notably, the majority of characters from the Street Fighter franchise, and even more alarmingly, the game features not one single character from the X-Men, the franchise that was key in making this crossover series so popular in the first place 21 years prior. Reportedly, when it comes to the game's character roster, in terms of the characters featured, it is said that Marvel Studios called many of the shots, prioritising characters based on how important they were to their cinematic universe at that exact moment in time. So characters were chosen based on how important they were to Disney based on product placement over that period. In terms of movie licensing, despite Disney owning Marvel Studios, in 2017 Fox held the movie rights to the X-Men franchise. From what I can tell, there is absolutely no reason that the entire X-Men lineup were left out of this game other than the fact that Disney could not use them to promote their movies, so bitterly left them out of the game, which is meant to celebrate the best characters Marvel has to offer. Hilariously, Capcom producer Michael Evans attempted to justify this greedy corporate nonsense by giving an entirely different excuse, stating, "We talked with Marvel very closely about their future roadmap, about what's going to be happening. Your modern Marvel fan, maybe they don't even remember some of the X-Men characters, but they know some of the Guardian characters or Black Panther. You know what I mean? Captain Marvel may seem like a strange pick, but she's fantastic. She fits the gameplay, she fits the story, and they're going to be really pushing her as a strong female lead all the way up into the movie. We're trying to take everything into account and choose the best characters." So yeah, according to one of the most important people who worked on this project, people apparently don't know who the X-Men are anymore. I would be curious to hear your thoughts down below whether you think there is any truth to this. As for me personally, it is one of the first Marvel franchises I think of when someone says Marvel to me. Hilariously, Evans even doubled down on his opinion by trying to claim X-Men characters in previous entries were only popular due to their function, rather than their likability as fleshed out characters within comic book culture. He states, if you were to actually think about it, these characters are just functions. They're just doing things. Magneto, case in point, is a favourite because he has 8-way dash and he's really fast, right? So our most technical players, all they want to do is triangle jump and that kind of stuff. Well, guess what? Nova can do the same thing, Captain Marvel can do the same thing, Ultron can do the same thing. Go ahead and try them out. All in all, I have to say, I find Evans' gymnastics absolutely hilarious with regards to trying to justify as to why there were no X-Men included in this bloody game. I understand that it would probably not be a good look, admitting that X-Men were left out of the game because Disney were not allowed to make an X-Men movie at the time, but trying to claim they are not popular characters is just plain stupid and insulting. So we have scoured back fighting mechanics, a puny roster missing some of the most popular Marvel characters of all time, but what about play modes, eh? What did the game have to offer in that department? Well, around this time frame, Capcom were not strangers to criticism and had made blunders with their fighting games prior to this one. Street Fighter V came under harsh criticism due to the amount of content available in the game being quite frankly abhorrent on release, and server issues delivered a poor online multiplayer experience in the early days too. So Capcom were looking to at least deliver better on features like this with Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, so that they could right some of their wrongs. This would mean that Infinite would feature many standard fighting game play modes, something that somehow Street Fighter V had managed to lack. But on top of that too, the game would feature an all-new play mode set to heavily target that huge diverse audience and casual players who tend to enjoy the now huge Marvel Cinematic Universe. In fact, with regards to touching on this, something I have not at all mentioned yet, which you would have at least noticed plenty of times in this video, is the game's new cinematic graphical style. This differed from the previous entry in the series. Marvel vs. Capcom 3 featured characters who looked like they were 3D models based on how characters were drawn in Marvel comic books. This game features a more realistic look to fall further in line with these new money-spinning movies. Capcom were really hoping to hook into the market who love these films, which is where a new play mode comes in, known as Infinite Story Mode. This is a 2-hour cinematic story campaign featuring story cutscenes and dialogue. The cheesy story ties all of the characters from the game into one cohesive narrative, which kind of reminds me of the subspace emissary that was featured in Super Smash Bros. Brawl a decade prior. The story delivers cringe-worthy one-liners delivered almost entirely without charm, but at least it is something new for the franchise, if we are going to draw any positives at all here. Reading various reviews that were published around this game's release, review scores seem to be average, with a mix of praise and criticism being presented by journalists at the time, with many being disappointed due to many faults we have already gone over, whilst many were impressed with the game's Infinity Stone system, with publications such as IGN noting that it is the highlight of the game. Speaking of IGN, they were particularly disgusted with the game's story and roster, stating, "Its story is dreadful, and its characters look like they were deliberately designed to spawn a million derpy memes." As discussed previously, the goal for Capcom with this one was to create a game with simplified play mechanics that would appeal to a gigantic market who watch Marvel movies. Capcom were unfortunately not capable of pulling this feat off, as the game would massively underperform commercially, even putting off many members of the already established Marvel vs. Capcom game franchise. Capcom were extremely confident that this game would shift a bare minimum of 2 million units, with the hope of selling much more if they got things right. The game never even got close to its sales target though, only selling around 1 million copies, and when you consider the popularity of the MCU, that's a bit embarrassing really. Within Capcom's 2018 integrated report, Capcom described sales for Infinite as weak, stating, "Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite delivered a certain level of sales, primarily overseas owing to deep-rooted popularity, but underperformed overall." Considering the commercial failings of this game, I see it as highly unlikely that there will ever be another Marvel vs. Capcom game. But which party is most to blame with regards to all of this? Can we credit Disney with being the entity who destroyed this franchise? Well, personally, I would place blame equally on both parties. Both failed in delivering an experience worthy of the Marvel vs. Capcom brand. Disney should certainly be held accountable for depriving long-term fans the ability to play as for X-Men. The X-Men, along with the cast of Street Fighter, are the very reason this crossover formula started. So to exclude them from this game is frankly ridiculous, even if Disney were not releasing any movies featuring the X-Men at the time. Blatant corporate greed has never been more transparent than it is when looking at Marvel vs. Capcom Infinity's roster. In fact, greed seems to be the running theme that looks to have destroyed any chances of this game becoming an all-time great. Capcom intentionally nuked most of the intricacies, six-man action, and chaos that made this franchise so popular in the first place. They threw away most of what fans enjoyed and were familiar with, simply to try and cater to a larger market who would ultimately ignore that this game even existed. Their greed would mean that they would satisfy no one. And don't even get me started on charging $30 to download 6 characters to a minuscule roster of just 30. Considering now that Disney now own Marvel and that Capcom seem to have become obsessed with turning profit through DLC and microtransactions, I am kind of glad that Marvel vs. Capcom games seem to be dead. With the way both Disney and Capcom operate currently, it would be unlikely that they would ever be capable of releasing another decent Marvel vs. Capcom game, even if all the licensing was ironed out to be made possible. So, to summarise, Disney certainly contributed to destroying Marvel vs. Capcom, but Capcom seemed to play their equal role in the affairs too. Despite the death of a once great franchise, all is not lost, as we still have all the great games from the series to go back and play. Games from a time period when Capcom were making games to simply deliver the best experience possible, rather than trying to appeal to markets that simply were not really there, and trying to fleece the consumer through microtransactions. So, I guess, ladies and gentlemen, I've finally finished telling the mad story of every Capcom vs game. Everything they did with Marvel, everything they did with SNK, and even with Tatsunoko. It has taken me nearly a year to make the videos covering this whole subject. But I must say, I feel great to have finished telling the entirety of this narrative. So, whatever will I do next, ladies and gentlemen? Street Fighter Cross Tekken maybe? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, I have dozens on my channel for you to check out, covering all sorts of aspects of gaming history. So why not go check out some of the older content? These videos are mostly funded by the fantastic people who back this channel over on Patreon. So if you want to help out and play an even more active role in my community, why not check out the backer incentives? Additional shoutouts and thank yous go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, Heo Paula Lopez, Joseph Rasmick, Doug Perkins, The Murder of Crows, Ego, Alethea Swanson, Angel Light 85, Asobi Kwang DX, Aswell Rorikai, Brian Barry, Camber Amber 82, Carlos Domingos, Computer Man, Daniel Daly, ECU Professor, Evan Balder, Gary Pinkett, Gianni Vicentesi, Glenny Glenn, Hamid Musa, House of Pated, Dropkin Varela, Jordan Durant, Keith Ferguson, Lars Sonderfin, Matthew Robinson, Michael Cullick, Nick Daniels, Philip Manth, Prince Knight, Princess Zana, Sponge McBee, Timothy W. Haskins II, TOG Driver, St Spaces, Adam Castin, Adrian Hannington, Anders Reinsbergs, Andrew Bazansky, Andrew Pearson, Angry Little SOB, Antonio Rodriguez, Bernard NG, Bubba Kitty, Chris Fisk, Chris Margarine, Chris Cool, Craig Jenkins, Crazy Yarl, Dan Barlow Jr., Dan Van Dam, David Bell, Francesco Lacriola, Gregory Samoragi Risk, Hans Christian, Ivan M, James Bishop, James McDonald, JB, Jesse Tay, Joel, John Bates, Kings Knight, Langston Miller, Lobster Puncher, Lewis Viant, Luke Canava, Marco Soto, Marvin Araliga, Master Jinx, Matthew Rindle, Mean Machine D, Michael Hall, Mike Bruno, Noob, Paul Elliott, PlayStation's Better, Posty XL, Punky Dudester, RetroLens.com, Richard Stu Stewart, Rick67, Ron Studd, Sarah Powell, Sarai H. Al Sarai, Stephen Lewis, Time Lord Soundwave, Tom Elliott, Flaming Renee, Wazza Jugs, Zai. Yeah.